The desperate arrival. On the outer rim of the Kepler chain, tucked between forgotten trade routes and asteroid belts too small to chart, there stood a junkyard that never slept. It was a place where stars came to die, where shattered vessels and broken dreams rusted under twin suns. And in the heart of this mechanical graveyard, inside a battered tin-roofed workshop stitched together from the skeletons of old ships, worked Hank McCoy. Hank was not a man of grandeur. His hands were rough, blackened with years of grease and burnt circuitry. His tools were old, his methods older, but his touch was pure magic. Engines that should have been scrapped sang again under his care. Systems deemed dead by entire fleets found second life in the cramped, humming chaos of his shop. That night, Hank was elbow-deep inside the belly of a broken cryo ship, cursing as he struggled with a stubborn valve. Sparks rained down around him, illuminating the soot-streaked walls lined with spare parts, old banners, and a few battered photographs of a life he barely remembered. Outside, a dust storm whispered across the yard, rattling metal sheets and bending old antennas into mournful weather vanes. He didn't hear the arrival. No ship's whine, no comms request, just the sudden heavy hush, the feeling of something vast and ancient pulling the very oxygen out of the room. He froze, spanner half-raised, every nerve in his body tingling. Slowly, Hank turned toward the workshop's bay door, drawn by the sense of a presence too large to ignore. There, framed by the storm's swirling dust and the flickering yard lights, stood a creature he had only ever glimpsed in the dusty corners of old myth, a dragon, but not the medieval horrors painted on old Terran scrolls. This being was an alien wonder. Her scales shimmered with the ghost light of dying stars, hues of deep violet and silver melting together as she moved. Her wings, vast and battered, curled protectively around a smaller, frilier form cradled against her chest. For a long moment, neither moved. The storm howled around them, but within that fragile standoff, silence reigned. The dragoness took a slow, shuddering step forward, her talons clicking against the cracked stone floor. Hank noted the trembling in her legs, the dark ichor seeping from wounds along her side, the desperate tightness in the way she clutched her young. With infinite care, she laid the bundle at the threshold. Her voice, when it came, was not a roar but a broken plea, a whisper inside Hank's mind, bypassing the need for crude air and sound. Please, save him. The youngling at her feet barely stirred. Its breath was shallow, its brilliant scales dim and cracked. Hank knelt instinctively, the mechanic's reflex to diagnose, to fix, overriding the instinct to fear. Up close, he could see the delicate lattice work embedded within the young dragon's chest, a mechanical core pulsing weakly, blinking with erratic failure codes. It wasn't just a living creature. It was life and machine intertwined, and the machine part was dying. Hank looked up at the dragoness, his throat dry, his mind racing. "I'm a mechanic," he said aloud, his voice rough. "I fix ships, engines, not." He gestured helplessly toward the young. "This." The dragoness lowered her head, her breath shuddering against the dusty ground. "You are more than that." The words carried on a tide of ancient sorrow and unyielding hope, wrapping around Hank's heart. He thought of the way he could coax life from scrap metal. The way dying ships seemed to breathe again under his touch. He thought of all the lost things he had stitched back together without ever knowing why it mattered. Maybe it had all been leading to this. The impossible repair. Hank pushed aside his doubts. He dragged his workbench closer, snapped on the overhead light, its harsh glare illuminating the dying young dragon's frail form. His hands moved automatically, clearing space, gathering tools, shifting into the rhythm he knew better than breathing. "I'll try," he said, setting his jaw. The young dragon lay still, its chest plate of broken biomechanical weave flickering weakly under Hank's inspection lights. Hank hovered over him, heart pounding, sweat trickling down his temple despite the cool air of the workshop. The alien child's breaths were shallow, each one weaker than the last, each exhale a battle against something unseen gnawing at its life. Hank wiped his hands on a rag and leaned closer, examining the vital core, a shimmering node embedded within the dragon's sternum. It was cracked down the center like an egg dropped on stone. Tiny fractures radiated outward, some leaking iridescent fluid, others sparking intermittently. Organic fibers wrapped around the core like vines strangling a dying tree. He cursed under his breath. This wasn't like any machine he had ever repaired. The technology, if it even could be called that, was half living, half engineered. A symbiosis so intricate that a mistake with a wrench could kill just as easily as negligence. The mother watched him silently, her breathing slow and labored. Her wounds wept starlight, but she did not flinch. Her focus was absolute, locked on the mechanic kneeling before her broken son. Hank exhaled shakily and rolled up his sleeves. He would need to stabilize the vital core before attempting anything else. He grabbed a cluster of microspanners and a portable patch kit, usually reserved for cracked coolant lines. Improvised surgery on alien tech with ship tools, he almost laughed at the insanity of it. Almost. He carefully slipped a sensor probe into one of the core's fractures, monitoring the energy flow. The readings came back sporadic, wild spikes followed by blackouts. He needed to bridge the shattered conduits without overloading the organic matrix. Time was bleeding out by the second. Hank braced his hands and began. He slid 2 microspanners into place, gingerly levering apart the cracked casing just enough to slip a patching line into the breach. The young dragon twitched but did not wake. Hank bit his lip, steadying the tool, soldering the bypass link in 3 precise microwelds. The first light returned to the vital core. Just a flicker, no more than a breath, but it was enough. Encouraged, Hank worked faster. He repaired what he could, rerouted what he couldn't, building a framework around the damaged heart. He didn't have the materials to rebuild it properly, but he could buy time, enough for healing, enough for hope. After what felt like hours, Hank placed the final connector, stepped back, and waited. At first, nothing. Then, a deep, shuddering breath from the youngling. The lights inside his broken chest brightened, stabilizing to a slow, steady rhythm. The dragon's tiny claw flexed weakly. He was alive. Hank sagged against the workbench, trembling with relief. He turned toward the mother, but she was not standing anymore. She was kneeling, her head bowed low to the ground before him, a gesture so ancient and profound that its meaning needed no translation. A vow. A bond not of ownership, but of honor. You have restored more than a life, her voice whispered through the workshop, filling every corner with the weight of a promise. You have touched the heart of the stars themselves. The awakening. The young dragon, whom his mother called Rylix, slept for a full day, wrapped in a cocoon of salvaged blankets and glowing faintly under Hank's watchful eye. Hank barely slept himself, sitting hunched on a stool, fiddling with the broken casing of a comm transmitter he wasn't really trying to fix. His mind was elsewhere, circling, grappling with what had just happened. He wasn't a healer. He wasn't a hero. He was just a man who knew how to coax broken things into working again. Yet somehow he had repaired a being whose very life was woven with the breath of dying stars, not with medicine, not with magic, but with tools meant for ship engines and duct-taped satellites. The absurdity gnawed at him, even as something deeper settled inside his chest. Something fierce. Something proud. Rylix stirred near dusk, his small body twitching beneath the cloth. Hank leaned in as the dragon's silvered eyelids fluttered open. When the young dragon looked up at him, there was no fear in those wide, luminous eyes, only curiosity and something else. Something that shivered in the air between them. Recognition. You fixed me, Rylix said. His voice was a broken whisper, thick with exhaustion but filled with awe, as if he spoke not to a man but to some impossibility. Hank scratched the back of his neck, awkward. I just patched you up, kid. You were the one who hung on. Rylix shook his head slowly. His small horns caught the last rays of dying sunlight, casting long shadows against the junk-strewn walls. No one else could, he said simply. The door creaked behind them. Rylix's mother stepped forward, her steps lighter now, though her wounds still wept faint ribbons of starlight. She knelt beside her son, brushing his brow with a claw tender enough to bring a lump to Hank's throat. "You are more than you know, human," she said, her gaze heavy with a meaning Hank couldn't yet grasp. "The core inside my son was not meant to be repaired. Its design is ancient, sealed beyond the reach of even our greatest shapers. It was thought absolutely inviolable." Hank snorted, wiping grime from his face with the sleeve of his jacket. "Well, nobody told me that." The dragoness smiled, a strange, solemn thing. "You touched something no one else dared," she said. "And now others will feel it." The ground under the workshop gave a faint, unsettling tremor. Hank looked up sharply. "What do you mean, others?" Before she could answer, a low vibration filled the air. A deep hum, distant yet growing closer, like a choir of engines descending from the heavens. The dragons tensed. Hank stood, heart thudding. In the dusk beyond the open bay doors, shapes began to form against the darkening sky. Not ships. Not men. Beasts. Dragons, dozens of them. Some massive, their wings spanning entire city blocks, their scales etched with constellations. Others were smaller, quicker, their forms rippling with ghostly light. They circled above the junkyard, casting shifting shadows that danced and leaped over the piles of scrap like living things. "They have heard the core's cry," Rylix's mother whispered. "And they are coming to see if the miracle is real." Hank stepped back instinctively as the first dragon landed heavily in the yard, scattering rusted engine parts and sending a gust of warm, charged air washing through the workshop. This dragon was older than Rylix's mother, its scales dulled and cracked with age. Its eyes, however, gleamed with sharp intelligence. It leaned down, peering into the open workshop, and spoke in a voice like distant thunder, "Human. Show us the starborn you mended." Hank swallowed hard. He glanced at Rylix, who sat up shakily on his pallet, looking between Hank and the dragons gathering like a storm. "They're not here to hurt you," Hank said, more to himself than anyone else. "They're here because you matter. Because somehow, a simple mechanic in a forgotten junkyard had just done something that would ripple across the galaxy." The recognition. The ancient dragon stepped into the workshop, its massive form filling the space yet moving with surprising grace. The other dragons arranged themselves outside in a living amphitheater, their eyes fixed on the small scene unfolding within. Hank felt their collective gaze like a weight on his shoulders, but he stood his ground. "I am Vorthak," the elder dragon rumbled, "keeper of the old ways. For 3,000 cycles, we have believed the star cores to be beyond mortal touch." His ancient eyes studied Rylix, who glowed softly with renewed life. "Yet here stands proof that legend may be wrong." Rylix's mother, who had introduced herself as Lethra, bowed her head respectfully. "Elder Vorthak, this human achieved what our greatest healers deemed impossible. He bridged life and machine with tools of crude metal and a heart of pure intention." Vorthak's gaze shifted to Hank, who suddenly felt very small and very human. "Show me," the elder commanded. With trembling hands, Hank activated a scanner, projecting the readings of Rylix's core into the air. The biosignatures danced in holographic light, organic and mechanical frequencies harmonizing in perfect balance. Where once there had been chaos and decay, now there was symphony. A collective intake of breath echoed from the gathered dragons. Some of the younger ones pressed closer, their scales shimmering with excitement. Others of the ancient ones simply stared in stunned silence. "The fusion pathways," Vorthak whispered, his voice filled with wonder. "They sing as they did in the first days, when our ancestors walked among the stars as living ships." He looked at Hank with something approaching reverence. "Human, do you understand what you have accomplished?" Hank shrugged, suddenly uncomfortable with the attention. "I fixed a kid who needed fixing. That's what I do." But Vorthak shook his massive head. "No. You have awakened something that has slept for millennia. The star cores were failing across our entire race. Our young were being born weak, unable to achieve the joining that makes us whole. We thought it was our ending, the slow extinction of everything we were. The elder dragon's voice grew stronger, carrying to every corner of the junkyard. But if one core can be healed, if the ancient pathways can be restored. He turned to address the assembled dragons. Then perhaps our people have hope yet. Lethra stepped forward, her voice carrying across the night air. The human asks for nothing. He seeks no reward, no recognition. He simply saw need and answered. She looked at Hank with profound gratitude. Yet his gift deserves acknowledgement. The dragons began to hum, a deep, resonant sound that vibrated through the metal and stone of the junkyard. It was not a song of words but of pure emotion, carrying gratitude, respect, and something deeper. Acceptance. Young Rylix struggled to his feet, his steps uncertain but determined. He approached Hank and placed a small, clawed hand on the mechanic's arm. In our tongue, he said softly, there is a word, Kalenvas. It means, one who mends the broken stars. That is what you are now, Hank McCoy. Not just a fixer of machines, but a healer of the impossible. Hank felt something shift inside him, not just pride, but purpose. For years, he had worked alone in his junkyard, patching together the discarded pieces of a galaxy that had forgotten him. But maybe, just maybe, he had been preparing for something greater all along. So what happens now? Hank asked, looking around at the assembled dragons. Vorthak's eyes gleamed with ancient wisdom and newfound hope. Now, Kalenvas, we begin the real work. There are others, many others, who need what you have learned to give. And we will not face the darkness alone. The new beginning. In the weeks that followed, Hank's quiet junkyard transformed into something he never could have imagined. Dragons arrived daily, some carrying their wounded young, others bringing damaged elders whose cores had begun to fail after centuries of faithful service. Each case was different, each repair a puzzle that challenged everything Hank thought he knew about the intersection of life and machine. He learned that the dragons were not simply aliens with mechanical implants. They were living starships, their bodies evolved over millions of years to traverse the void between worlds. The star cores were their hearts, their engines, their souls, all bound together in a harmony so complex that even they had forgotten how to heal it when it broke. But Hank's gift wasn't just mechanical aptitude. It was the ability to see past the impossible complexity to the simple truth underneath, that everything broken wanted to be whole again. Whether it was a rusted engine block or an ancient dragon's failing heart, the principle remained the same. Young Rylix became his constant companion, serving as translator not just of language but of the deeper mysteries of dragon physiology. The youngling's recovery had been complete, more than complete. His core now pulsed with a strength that amazed even the eldest dragons, and his bond with Hank had created something unprecedented, a bridge between two species that had never truly understood each other. The Galactic Council has taken notice, Lethra informed Hank one evening as they watched the sunset paint the junkyard in shades of gold and crimson. They want to know about the human who can heal the star-touched. Hank grunted, focused on calibrating a delicate resonance chamber for an elderly dragon named Thessarian. Let them wonder. I've got work to do. But the galaxy, it seemed, had other plans. The first official delegation arrived on a Tuesday, sleek ships bearing the emblems of a dozen different worlds, all eager to understand the miracle happening in a forgotten corner of space. Hank met them in his grease-stained coveralls, tools still in hand, and listened with growing irritation as they spoke of technological breakthroughs and interspecies cooperation initiatives. You want to study what I do? Hank asked, cutting through their flowery speeches. Fine. But I'm not leaving my workshop, and I'm not stopping my work to fill out your forms. Elder Vorthak, who had taken to spending his days in the junkyard, rumbled with amusement. The Kalenvas speaks wisdom. Understanding comes not from dissection but from practice. And so began an unlikely partnership. The dragons provided protection and wisdom, the various galactic governments provided resources and recognition, and Hank continued to do what he had always done, fix things that needed fixing. But as the months passed, he began to understand that he was fixing more than just broken cores. Each dragon he healed carried the story back to their distant homes, spreading word of the human who had bridged two worlds with nothing but determination and compassion. Trade routes that had been closed for generations reopened. Ancient grudges began to heal alongside the repaired star cores. Young Rylix grew stronger and more confident each day, his scales now bearing a faint pattern that resembled circuit traces, a mark of his unique healing. "You know," he said to Hank one evening as they worked together on a particularly challenging repair, "I think this was always meant to happen." "What was?" Hank asked, not looking up from his delicate work. "You and me. All of this." Rylix gestured to the bustling activity around them, dragons and humans working side by side, learning from each other, building something new. "I think the universe has been waiting a long time for someone to show us that broken doesn't mean lost forever." Hank paused in his work, looking around at the controlled chaos of his transformed junkyard. Ships and dragons shared the sky overhead, their forms silhouetted against the stars. The workshop hummed with activity as apprentices, both human and dragon, learned the delicate art of star core maintenance. Lethra sat nearby, teaching a group of young engineers about the organic components that complemented the mechanical ones. It was still a junkyard where broken things came to be made whole. But now it was something more, a place where two species had learned to see past their differences to the similarities underneath. A place where the impossible happened daily, one careful repair at a time. "Maybe you're right, kid," Hank said softly, returning to his work with steady hands and an open heart. "Maybe some things are worth believing in." As night fell over the Kepler chain, the twin suns setting behind a horizon filled with the silhouettes of living star ships, Hank McCoy, mechanic, healer, bridge between worlds, continued to work. Because somewhere in the vast darkness of space, there would always be broken things that needed fixing, and broken hearts that needed healing. And he would be ready. The end.